Hey everyone, welcome back to GameSpot's coverage of E3 2019. Joining me, Lucy James, on the couch is Mike Mahoney and Sean Crooks, lead producer on Watch Dogs Legion. Now this is where I, as a British person, come into my own, hopefully, because it's set in jolly old London. Sean, how was the reveal for you? And I guess what's been the reaction to the new setting?
The reveal has been amazing. The feedback, all the things we're hearing is fantastic. The team are very proud. Obviously, the setting is London, and London's very interesting for Watch Dogs as a brand because London being one of the most surveilled cities in the world, its culture, its history, the contrast between modern architecture and old buildings, it's just a perfect playground for our characters.
One thing I would say that I noticed from that gameplay reveal is something that's very strange to me is that there are guns in Watch Dogs Legion, whereas obviously guns illegal in the UK, and hopefully will continue to be so. But how did you go about introducing them as a part of your gameplay in Watch Dogs Legion?
So what's interesting is in Watch Dogs Legion, we set London in the near future. In the near future and Watch Dogs, we always flirt with technology and its impact in society. And in the near future London, 3D printing is everywhere. So everyone can print what they want. And also in London, the main bad guys, the authoritarian regime that's taking control over London, Albion, is a private military corporation. So that's how we're looking at, an alternate what-if London and how we could introduce that.
So it's set in a post-Brexit world, and in the voiceover in the trailer, the guy said, the government has abandoned us. Is that how this militia kind of gets its claws in?
Well, I think the important thing about how we position the world of Watch Dogs Legion is that there are many problems in the world right now, and we feel that we wanted to kind of express all of them and look at, say, well, how would all of that contribute to a future London and what would it look like? So it's more that the causes of Brexit and what are the causes of the changes to the world in Watch Dogs Legion, not necessarily that in and of itself.
Did you know pretty early on in development of this game that you wanted to let people be any character, or is that something that arose out of the development process, or what was that decision like?
So in Watch Dogs, we always flirted with the profiler cards and looking into people's lives, and one of the discussions early on in Watch Dogs Legion was, what if all of that was accurate, real, and simulated? What if every character we looked at had a real life? You could follow them. If they had a lunch, they would go to lunch. If they had a job, you could follow them to their job. And it actually worked that way. And then on top of that, you could find them, recruit them, and play as anyone, and that's pretty much how it evolved.
And that was kind of what we were saying when we first saw it during the press conferences. That kind of makes sense. It's like a natural evolution. It's like the earlier Watch Dogs games, yeah, you're looking and seeing like this flavor text about this random NPC that's going by. You can also maybe steal their money. But now it's almost like that you're pushing it to its extreme, and like, oh, you see character stats. I need like someone who's good with drones, etc. I'm gonna recruit them. They're gonna have their own mission. It feels like the natural yet extreme evolution of the Watch Dogs format.
And that allowed us to do some really cool things. So every character in our world has traits, and these are gameplay elements that you can find that might support you in what you need to do. So you kind of look around for a cool character. Say you have a drone problem, you got to find a guy that's pretty strong with drones. And once you find them, you can look into their lives, look at their problems, convince them to join DedSec by helping them, and then you have them in your team as a fully playable character.
So, I mean, if you're going to be flitting around between all these characters, how do you keep the momentum of the storyline going? What's the narrative thread that's pulling you along?
The strong core storyline of Watch Dogs Legion is about fighting and resistance. And one of the strong themes we always said, it's about a group of people banding together and fighting back. So we focus all our narrative around those points. So we have storylines that involve crime bosses that's taking advantage of an absence of a collapsing government, and the private military corporation also abusing the same thing. So the idea of building a bunch of like-minded people to fight back against that is what really drove us.
So kind of playing devil's advocate, the other day when I was saying how super ambitious and interesting it looks, and I personally really enjoy games where there's, literally right before this moment I said, I wonder if there's permadeath for these characters, or there's a moment where someone was injured and then the word came up. Playing devil's advocate, what if I'm someone who really likes a scripted character? Why am I going to care about all of these people if I can be anyone and they're not someone that Ubisoft has spent years just writing specifically for them?
That's a very cool answer to that. Every single character is well realized. You can literally play a cinematic with different characters, and they have different personalities in that cinematic. All the little nuances of how they speak their lives, they all come through in the cinematics and the storylines, and when you play with them, you really get attached to these characters. It's amazing.
That's what's interesting to me with these kind of games. Not to go off on a tangent, you probably know I like talking about these kind of games, but it's always interesting to me how like I get more attached to people and I'm kind of like telling their story myself. Yeah, they've got a few character attributes. I know they're good with drones. I know she's this older woman from. I was about to name some neighborhood from London, but I don't know them that
Camden,
well.
there's a good one.
Camden, thank you. So, and then these come up, and I'm like, oh, I remember what I did with her in the game. I remember what he did, and it's always interesting how that kind of storytelling gets me personally more attached to these characters than if they were scripted for me.
So yeah, I mean, the cool thing about Players Anyone and looking into their lives is they create these tiny anecdotes. I have a great one. I was playing before coming here, and I had a character. It was an identity thief. And then in the contact list, they had another identity thief. And I'm like, oh, who's the real guy? Who's stealing from who here, right? So I went into a full sidetrack about figuring out which person was the real person and who was the identity thief. So there's very cool little things, even just the systems that you play with, they allow you to do that, you don't see in other games.
And also, I mean, we're watching Helen right now.
Oh, Helen.
Fan favorite
The world
Helen.
loves Helen.
How differently are these characters going to play? Because obviously I can see her kind of ambling around a little bit, moving a little bit slower. I imagine not every character is going to move as slowly as Helen.
No, well, basically what we wanted to do is represent the range of how you can play fantasy. You're playing as anyone and what that means. From a grime young street kid to a grandma. We just kind of felt, exposing Helen was clearly give the players an idea of the range of all the different personas and archetypes that you can play with in all of these characters.
Let's talk a little bit about London itself. So Ubisoft has this pedigree of really going into town on its research when it comes to replicating real-life places. I mean...
I thought that was a pun. Sorry, I was...
It was. I was hoping to slide it out there. In terms of things like, Paris for Assassin's Creed Unity, and of course London has been visited in Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Were you in communication with the Syndicate team? It basically got the map down. We need some tweaks, but what was the research process like?
So in Ubisoft, obviously, the teams talk together a lot. There's a lot of learning, a lot of history that we can pick up from each other, but obviously a modern London is very different from a classic historical London. So, we had to go back to the drawing board. We had to assess all the different neighborhoods. What is crime like there? What kind of gangs is there? What is the culture like? Is there any cool local flavor or businesses that exist in that area? We do all this research even before we set foot or even decide to build this city. And once we have all of that, we have this big library of information. We fly down there. We spend a lot of time in the city absorbing the culture, taking pictures, and that's the base of how we build the worlds in Ubisoft.
So what are the limits around London? What boroughs are we going to expect? So we've seen Camden here. We saw sort of around Westminster earlier. We saw Tamis. Is that the Tamis Dock? The boat?
Yes. So basically we have...
there. That's a pub.
Of course, London based on pubs, right?
Yeah.
So basically we have up to Tower Hamlets East.
Yep.
We have up to Buckingham Palace in the west. We go as south as Brixton, and obviously as north as Camden and Shoreditch.
Can I control the Queen?
The Queen is nowhere to be seen in Watch Dogs Legion. It's part of our backstory and world narrative.
Oh.
Did the Play as Anyone system create problems when you were building this version of London?
Play as Anyone is hugely ambitious, and all the systems that come into play, obviously it's like something we've never seen before. But it's allowed us to do some amazing things. The things we see it do and the anecdotes we get from players and ourselves when we interact with the systems have been breathtaking.
When it comes to, so here we can see that, they're talking about human trafficking.
Yes.
Watch Dogs 2 had a very, a lighter tone. You had this lovable band of misfits getting together. What's the tone of Watch Dogs Legion?
So we wanted to kind of realize the oppressive state of the authoritarian regime and what that meant, but also, British people, they have a great sense of humor. They love their sarcasm. So we couldn't just leave it at that. So we wanted to kind of spice it up. As you see in the walkthrough there, we have Bagley, our AI assistant, who had some lovely dots of humor into the action. So, balancing the British humor with, the authoritarian tone, and that was our aim.
Are we going to get some good sort of fashioned London slang in there?
There's little bits and pieces, yeah, she'll recognize some.
Because I do wonder, I often wonder, because I moved here a few months ago, sometimes I'll say things that don't translate to an American audience? Is that something you have to be aware of? Is that British people have a very, very particular style of humor?
I always struggle with saying chips.
Yeah.
I always get it wrong. I don't say fries, I say chips, and there's always trunk and hood and car. So there's a little bits of elements, and I think representing that slang, representing the local culture, it's very important to make the game feel like it's based and cemented in London.
When we saw the demo the other day during the Ubisoft press conference, it ended with that cutscene between two of those characters. Was that the result of Ubisoft knowing which two characters would end the presentation, or will I see that if I'm playing the game?
So actually, in any cinematic, it can be dynamic depending on who you play. We do have the villains, the bad guys of our stories. You will interact with those guys, but watching any character, literally any character you can find in the world starring in your cinematics, and then watching the narrative flourish come through based on the type of personality that they have, that for me is what really changes cinematics and Watch Dogs Legion.
I mentioned it earlier, and it does feel like, especially when the way you can like see everybody's information there out in public, that felt like a natural evolution. But the fact that you are jumping into different people in this series that thematically is about surveillance and how no one has privacy, it feels like Watch Dogs Legion is almost what I wanted Watch Dogs to be all along through the past 2 games now. I don't know if that was this feeling on the dev side of things, like, oh, this is what we've been wanting to make. I kind of asked earlier if it arose out of development, but does the dev team feel like, oh, this is what we've been trying to nail for X amount of years now?
I mean, it was always in discussion, and we always chose to go into different places. But the goal this time around was to literally say we want everything that we see when we profile someone to be real. Their jobs, what they do. Characters will even change clothes. That when they leave work, they'll change their clothes into different outfits. It's making sure that everything that you read, it means something, it attaches to their trait, and says something about what they do in the world. And then that breathes life into the character. When you recruit them, when you play as them, you really feel attached to them.
So whenever I recruit someone, I have to kick off a kind of origin mission. Is that for every single person or just some key figures?
So basically, every single person in the world has how much they like DedSec. Some of them not so much, some of them are huge fans. So the goal is you have to convince them to join the cause. So what you do is, you look into their lives, you analyze what problems they might have, you go fix it for them, and that kind of warms them up to DedSec. Then at that point, you can kind of trigger an origin story, and then they join your team. It's pretty cool.
I'm curious, I don't know how accurate or how honest of an answer you can give, but does the ambition and size of this game kind of scare you from a dev side?
The most important thing for us is that we put it on the floor today for people to see and watch our guys play. People are spending a lot of time with it, and that's real. It literally works like that right now. There's no smoke and mirrors. What you're seeing is what the game is doing. When we had this thing running, when we had all the technology working, and when all the pieces slotted together, it was a inspiring thing to see.
It was such an exciting game. It's funny, I think maybe it's just the cynic in me. I'm looking for the spot where I'm like, oh, that's the catch, or that's the caveat. So far, I have not found it, but I'm saying, it almost seems like, why aren't more people doing something like this with there are smaller studios doing it on a smaller scale, like State of Decay does something similar, but on a much, much smaller scale. But to see a big Ubisoft studio doing it, I still feel like I'm waiting for, oh, I get it. That's the smoke and mirror you mentioned.
So, I mean, it was a core driver for us. From very early on, we looked at that and said, that's exactly what we want to do. So when you orientate a very large team around it from early days and spend years on this kind of technology, you put a lot of effort into it, but it's focused, right? And that's how you break down these barriers, these technological difficulties that, have been very not easy to surmount to this point. And that's how we've managed to literally build something so special that we can literally deliver you what we're showing.
Awesome. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about Watch Dogs Legion. When can people play it?
So right now we have it. We have a theater demo that they can consume in our booth and see it played live for them. And the game is out on March 6, 2020.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
And if you're watching at home, make sure to don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Apex Legends Season 2. And yes, we're going to be talking about that new character, Watson.